Thank you very much, Ben, for the kind and introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, very good morning. Thank you for being with us today. And I'm indeed very pleased to introduce the first topic of today's conference, the new globalization. And I think just to set the scene, the Biden administration announced last week on Friday that it issued an executive order with a new framework to protect data transfers between the US and the EU, which will lead, obviously, or is aimed to lead to more trust and more stability in transborder data flows. But at the same time, we're seeing a rise of data localization laws, and we'll get back to that in a minute. So clearly, there are, I would say, conflicting trends playing around. So the first topic of today is a very important one also for business, about new globalization and how tech policy can support global growth and avoid protectionism. And it's a great delight to introduce my panel speakers. I'm not going to repeat the introduction by Ben, but we welcome specifically Mr. Jean-Pierre Raffarin, Mr. Ventsislav Karadjov, and also Mr. Thibaut Kleiner of the European Commission. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us this morning. And maybe if I could, as a kind of to open up the debate, ask you in the same order to share your initial thoughts about the topic of this first panel conversation. So, new globalization, how can tech policy indeed enhance data flows, enhance collaboration, rather than creating protectionism? Monsieur Raffarin, la parole est à vous.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor. If you don't mind, I will speak French because the topic is very touchy today, and I'm better to speak French for this main, very important topic today. La nouvelle gouvernance technologique est un sujet très important, mais dont nous débattons dans une période très difficile. Nous devons faire face à 3 crises majeures. La première crise, c'est la crise qu'est la guerre en Europe, et une guerre qui a des ramifications partout dans le monde, qui a mobilisé plusieurs votes à l'ONU. Et c'est donc une guerre qui a une ampleur préoccupante. Et dans ce contexte-là, on voit bien que toute gouvernance technologique est connectée évidemment à la situation de guerre, à cette situation militaire qui non seulement martyrise aujourd'hui le peuple ukrainien, mais qui impacte complètement la gouvernance globale. Première crise, cette guerre avec laquelle nous devons vivre. Deuxième crise, cette crise du Covid qui n'est pas terminée et qui a posé et qui pose la question de la souveraineté partout dans les États. Dans la crise de 2008, nous avions vu qu'une certaine gouvernance mondiale s'installait, que le multilatéralisme existait malgré la crise. Là, bien que le virus soit mondial, ne tienne pas compte des frontières, on a vu les États construire leur propre défense, leur propre protection, leur propre vaccin, et s'est organisé une sorte de retour des frontières et donc un affaiblissement de la coopération. Et aujourd'hui, chaque pays tient un discours national de souveraineté, mais nous savons tous que la souveraineté intégrale est une utopie, et donc il faut coopérer. Et donc il faut trouver, inventer, y compris dans les technologies, inventer ce nouvel équilibre entre souveraineté et coopération. On a besoin de coopération, et la place de la coopération dans la préoccupation de souveraineté est très importante. Crise de la guerre, crise Covid, mais aussi crise du progrès. On voit bien qu'il y a eu historiquement une mobilisation sur la technologie, sur les technologies, sur les sciences, parce que c'était la source du progrès et du progrès pour l'humanité. Aujourd'hui, nous voyons bien que le progrès non seulement fragilise la planète, mais aussi construit des dépendances nouvelles et des fragilités nouvelles. On voit bien que non seulement le progrès, quand il s'applique à l'éducation et à la santé, est fantastique, positif et nous fait grandir et nous fait résoudre aujourd'hui des problèmes que les générations précédentes n'ont pas su résoudre, mais nous voyons aussi clairement qu'il y a des problèmes nouveaux qui arrivent, la dépendance notamment, par exemple, aux infrastructures de communication et aux risques terroristes, comme nous l'avons vu à plusieurs reprises, y compris en Europe, par exemple, avec ce qui s'est passé sur les canalisations de gaz en Baltique. Donc, on voit bien que le progrès aujourd'hui est aussi en discussion. Ça, c'est le fond de la réflexion sur la gouvernance technologique. La guerre aujourd'hui, le débat sur la souveraineté, le débat sur le progrès. Ça, c'est le contexte. Moi, je crois qu'il y a trois grands sujets de coopération, évidemment, qui sont en fait des sujets sur lesquels il y a plutôt un consensus mondial. Je pense notamment au climat, ce que moi j'appelle la planétisation des consciences. La planète est devenue un objet politique, on n'a pas tous les mêmes politiques, mais tout le monde comprend que la façon nouvelle de protéger l'humanité, c'est de protéger la planète. Et c'est très important d'avoir sur ce sujet un consensus mondial. Les jeunes de Shanghai pensent comme les jeunes de San Francisco, pensent comme les jeunes de Bangalore, pensent comme les jeunes de Paris. Il est clair aujourd'hui qu'il y a un consensus sur ce sujet. Quand nous avons bâti le multilatéralisme avec le consensus de Washington, nous n'avions pas cette vision-là, un consensus des sociétés civiles. Aujourd'hui, les sociétés civiles sont pour la planète. Cet espace-là est un espace de coopération pour les technologies qui est l'espace prioritaire selon moi. Le deuxième espace est naturellement l'intelligence artificielle et le big data. Et ça, c'est, je crois, très important. L'Europe a fait des efforts considérables, a initié beaucoup de choses en harmonie avec ses valeurs. Je crois que de ce point de vue-là, l'Europe est assez exemplaire et je crois qu'il nous faut avancer également dans cette direction pour notre coopération internationale. Un, le climat, deux, les big data, et trois, ce que j'appellerais naturellement le social avec deux préoccupations majeures, la santé, pour laquelle on voit bien des mutations considérables aujourd'hui dans l'exercice de la santé grâce à la santé à distance. C'est quelque chose, je crois, très important parce que la santé est en fait la première préoccupation des sociétés civiles. Santé et éducation sont des grands espaces de coopération. Climat, big data, social sont, je crois, les trois espaces de coopération qui sont à privilégier. Et naturellement, sur ces sujets, à côté de cette coopération, il y a évidemment deux grands domaines d'extrême vigilance et sur lesquels, naturellement, en fonction de nos civilisations, de nos cultures, nous pouvons avoir des positions différentes. L'Europe montre clairement son importance stratégique pour les protections de la personne, protection de la vie privée, protection de l'individu, et je dirais aujourd'hui tout particulièrement protection des enfants, protection des jeunes, pour faire en sorte qu'ils ne soient pas aujourd'hui manipulés par des forces plus ou moins obscures qui peuvent les conduire à des situations d'extrême danger personnel. Et donc on voit bien que face à ce progrès des technologies, nous avons une priorité majeure qui est celle de la priorité de la personne, notamment pour toutes les philosophies politiques qui font de la personne l'unité de base de toute société et de toute culture. Et donc là, on voit bien que face à l'invasion d'un certain nombre de technologies, la personne doit être protégée. Mais il faut aussi, naturellement, que les États trouvent leur propre protection, deuxième grand champ d'innovation, parce que les États ont là besoin, naturellement, d'une protection et on voit aujourd'hui la cyberdéfense se développer, on voit aujourd'hui naturellement des menaces terroristes se développer également et un certain nombre de pratiques qui nous montrent bien que les États comme les personnes ont aussi besoin d'une certaine protection et cette protection ne se fera pas sans une réforme de la gouvernance mondiale, c'est-à-dire notamment une réforme du Conseil de sécurité de l'ONU, une réforme de l'institution naturellement onusienne. Dans ce contexte, et là je veux conclure rapidement cet exposé pour ne pas être pour tous trop long, il est clair que personne et État vont jouer la question de protection, et là aussi des vigilances sont nécessaires parce que naturellement il y a une dialectique de préoccupations communes mais aussi d'influence concurrentielle qui peut être très difficile. En résumé, je crois qu'il ne faut pas se tromper. La 3e édition de RAID nous ouvre des pistes, mais la condition, le préalable aujourd'hui à des grandes avancées en matière de gouvernance et de nouvelle globalisation, c'est naturellement la recherche de la paix. C'est difficile dans un climat de guerre, dans un climat de tension, dans un climat de méfiance comme nous l'avons aujourd'hui, d'atteindre des progrès qui soient aussi stratégiques que les progrès qui peuvent arriver par une gouvernance de technologie. Donc je crois vraiment qu'aujourd'hui, tous ceux qui cherchent à avoir une saine et juste coopération dans les techs doivent se dire que le premier de nos combats, c'est d'abord le cessez-le-feu en Ukraine et c'est le retour à un monde apaisé. La paix est le préalable au développement technologique. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur Raffarin. Mr. Karadjov, I would like to invite you to also share your kind of opening remarks on the topic of our panel discussion, please.
With the participants, the idea of what EDPB is. European Data Protection Board is actually the European body responsible for the consistent application of this international, already known General Data Protection Regulation, that is the privacy legal framework for protecting of the European citizens' rights. And starting from that point of view, we as regulators that participate in the European Data Protection Framework, that is the European Data Protection Board, we are supporters of innovation. However, in some cases of our common values should take priority. And that's why understanding that the world is becoming increasingly interconnected, and it is ever driven further in the light of the technological development, we have to understand that the new globalization should work for everyone. And in order to work for everyone and to have no physical boundaries, but also no protectionism, we need a harmonized legal framework for the new globalization. But this framework also should protect and safeguard individual rights. So at the EDPB, we're determined to promote these high standards for protection, not just in the European Economic Area, but also worldwide. As such, we take quite a lot of continuous efforts to engage with not only the international community, but also to try to enforce these new global privacy rules for the new digital market and new services. And the reason that we are active on this global stage and systematically engage in dialogue with regulators from outside of the European Union is that data flows and therefore data protection are by nature international. This is our understanding. And the GDPR is also de facto, according to us, an international instrument, and this is how we have to consider it. Because of it, EU citizens' data can travel outside of the European Union, but also the level of protection must be preserved. Similarly, companies wishing to do business in the European Union need to comply with the GDPR, and to ensure efficient enforcement is therefore key that we cooperate internationally, not only on the European level field. The GDPR, if I can present it this way, was prepared in full awareness of the globalized context in which it would have to operate. It acknowledges that personal data circulates globally and on an unprecedented scale due to new technologies and its intensive use by private companies and public authorities. So the GDPR is based on the belief that economic and societal interests and data protection and privacy can be compatible without sacrificing one or the other. Even more economic and social factors are triggering new legislative proposals. As we heard this morning, the US has adopted the executive order, which actually is part of this process of harmonization and improved enforcement and safeguarding of data rights, of individual rights. So I would say that from Chile to South Korea, to finish this way, to Brazil and Kenya, over 137 countries around the world currently modernizing their privacy laws. This, of course, creates new opportunities to increase protection of individuals and facilitate data flow. The GDPR shows that regulating data flows and technological development isn't necessarily a barrier to trade and globalization. Rather, contributes to competitiveness of the digital market, but also generates trust in users of digital services. This is our understanding to start the discussion. Hello?
Okay, I see that Filip
Facilitator
is muted, but maybe I can follow up directly, as I think it's my
Sure.
turn also to introduce the discussion here on the new globalization. And I would follow up very much also on what Mr. Raffarin was saying in terms of this, the new globalization that we have in front of us. I mean, it's not anymore this positive development, and there are really geopolitical factors that today are questioning the very foundation of global trade. The European Union is the biggest trade partner globally. It's the biggest exporter, it's the biggest importer of goods and services. And clearly it is in Europe's interest to support these trade developments further, also because it's creating lots of jobs in the EU. I think that it's we are more than 35 million jobs that are related to these exports of these in the EU. And clearly we need to have conversations now with our partners because this global trade has evolved. We've seen with the COVID pandemic, now with the war, a situation where somehow scarcity is back, very much like, after Second World War, we see worries about access to energy, to food, to raw materials. And worse, we see also what one could call a weaponization of trade. So some governments are using trade and to restrict access to goods as a way to pursue their agenda, which is very much linked to a warlike situation. In that context, data is a reality that is very important, and I think it's good to put the spotlight on this. A few years ago, we were saying that data is the new oil in the global economy. I think today we see that oil is still very important, and data must be qualified. We must be clear that today nobody is talking about data without also raising protection in terms of private protection, so the personal data that we have globally, and raising, as we saw with the positive development in the US last Friday, the executive order that the US promoted to meet basically expectations from Europe, but also protection for data in terms of security. And in that context, I wanted to flag that from the EU's perspective, we believe that there is scope to make this globalization, this development in the digital sector, a positive narrative. We are committed to a rules-based global trade, trade that is based also on fair elements, that is based also on principles. And in fact, that's what we've put very clearly forward in the EU, an approach to tech policies where the digital transformation is there to be a positive factor, to be something that is not used against the people, but actually for the people, and making sure that they benefit in all of them. And in fact, we took it very seriously because we put forward a declaration on digital rights and principles, which makes it very clear what we want from this digital transformation. We want the digital transformation to be centered on people's benefit. We want it to be inclusive, that freedom is protected online. We also want the digital transformation to be safe and secure. And last but not least, we want it to be sustainable so that also the environment benefits. And very much in line with these principles, we've put forward a legislative agenda. Just to quote a few of the pieces of legislation we've adopted, GDPR was just mentioned, protecting data for people, personal data. The Digital Markets Act that is trying to preserve a fair market in the digital sector towards online platform. Digital Services Act that deserves also there a lot of attention on e-commerce and freedom of online can be protected. Data Governance Act, Data Act to make sure that we have a real single market for data and also globally. AI Act, Cyber Resilience Act, Digital Identity Act, and so on, I could say. We've tried really to cover the ground in the EU to make sure that we have a complete framework that can empower people and also that can clarify to business how they can go about their activities and how they can make the best out of the digital transformation while fitting with our values and our expectations. So just very briefly, what does it mean concretely for globalization? Basically, Europe is there for business. We are the most open economy. We want investment to go on and continue. We want trade to increase, also in the digital sector. And we want to develop global standards and global rules that can facilitate this trade. So essentially, we are in the process of not only putting forward our framework as an example of what people could use. You know, we are producing standards, we are producing patterns, we are producing these regulatory frameworks, and they are on offer. Anybody can look at them very transparently. Anybody can talk to us to see what they can take from these elements. And we believe that through this, we can also rebuild the trust that is currently lacking in some of our activities. We are also trying to take a very active role, for instance, by drawing partnerships with key countries in the digital sector. So we have launched the Trade and Technology Council with the US. And I think it was very instrumental also in reaching agreements on some rules and including on data flows. We have a digital partnership with Japan that was signed a few months ago, and we are actively working on also a digital partnership with Singapore, with South Korea. We also have another trade and technology with India. So you see the Indo-Pacific region is very, very strongly in our mind to have partners there to deliver global rules. But I should also underline that it's not only these more developed countries that are important for us. We are also working very closely with Africa, the African Union, but also with individual countries. There as well, fostering investment in digital technologies, but also making sure that we have a system where when we develop together with these countries some data infrastructure, it's for their benefit. The data should stay with them. It should not leave to some big countries in Asia. It should be there to benefit the people. And similarly, when we work with South America, we have developed provisions so that they can also look at our regulatory framework to make sure that the benefits are for them and not just for foreign investors. So in essence, we believe that the new globalization is about rebuilding trust. Trust in our common rules, trust in our abilities to deliver for the benefit of our people and citizens, but also trust in the data flows that we want to intensify. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Raffarin, Mr. Karadjov, and Mr. Kleiner. I think these in your introductory comments already touched upon very fundamental and important initiatives. I mean, I would like to open up a bit for debate, and I read recently, we talked a lot about data flows, but I think it was the OECD that published a few months ago a report on the preliminary mapping of data localization measures, and that report showed that localization measures are on the rise. That a total of 92 data localization measures are in place across 39 countries, and that more than half of them have been put in place during the last few years, basically. So this is really, let's say, a worrying phenomenon, and even more importantly, they're also becoming more restrictive, because 2/3, according to the OECD, of measures in place involved a storage requirement with a flow prohibition. So the measures are on the rise, and they're becoming even more restrictive. What can, I have a question on what regulators can do and what governments can do, basically to facilitate cross-border trade in the data space. But let's maybe focus first on governments. What can governments do to enhance cooperation? Mr. Kleiner, may I ask? Oh, Monsieur Raffarin, can I maybe put that question to you as a former Prime Minister of the French government? What is it that governments can do basically to facilitate, to enhance more, collaboration at a global level or a European level on data and AI and internet regulation?
Ma réponse est que, comme l'a dit Thibaut Kleiner, tant que la confiance n'est pas reconstruite, la coopération sur ces sujets sera complexe. Donc, ma position personnelle, et avec mon expérience qui est la mienne, je crois qu'on n'a aucune chance de réussir si certains veulent donner des leçons aux autres. Je crois que la seule voie de progrès pour un gouvernement, et en ce qui concerne l'Europe, pour l'Union européenne, c'est de chercher à être exemplaire et à être cohérent sur nos valeurs, et de faire en sorte que nous construisions une régulation cohérente avec les valeurs de l'Union européenne. Et si l'Union européenne défend ses propres valeurs, les met en œuvre avec notamment cet arsenal législatif dont il a été fait question, je pense que l'Europe affirmera une forme d'exemplarité, et c'est l'exemplarité qui peut être contagieuse. Je ne crois pas qu'il puisse y avoir aujourd'hui, dans ce climat de tension, des initiatives qui soient, je dirais, transpartisans, transblocs. Aujourd'hui, on voit qu'un certain nombre de blocs sont en constitution. Il est difficile de penser qu'on pourra avoir des avancées quand les relations de confiance ne sont pas là. Nous touchons à l'essence même, pour nous, Européens, de la démocratie, au vivre ensemble, au respect de la personne et de sa protection dans un univers où multiples menaces existent. Dans ce contexte-là, je crois qu'il faut travailler sur nous-mêmes, faire en sorte que l'Europe soit la plus harmonieuse possible sur ces sujets et avancer dans cette direction en comme le disait tout à l'heure M. Kleiner, avec transparence et que chacun peut avoir accès au dispositif. Mais je crois que la période n'est pas au prosélytisme, la période est plutôt à faire bien les choses chez soi et montrer la réalité de ce que peut être une régulation à inspiration démocratique.
Merci beaucoup. Mr. Karadjov, from a regulator's point of view, do you have, I mean, we often refer to GDPR, of course, for sure, but do you have any views on how regulators can also contribute to cross-border cooperation?
Yeah, I would say it's for regulators much more important is to be independent and have enough instruments, tools in order to see the picture, the full picture, and be able to impose corrective measures on time in order to be effective in the way how they are obliged to regulate the digital market and the protection of personal data. But on behalf of the governments, I would also say that as the European citizen, most of them have to start thinking more digitally and provide more digital services, not only in their strategies, but in practice. And when they start thinking digitally, they will understand the globalization and how the digital business is working. From that perspective, I would say that they need a little bit more encouragement on behalf of the business, because the business should talk with the governments, and they have different ways to cooperate with the governments. On the other way, it is also the international organizations, and you have mentioned the OECD, putting that more harmonized way approaching the globalization and the protection of the rights of the individuals in this globalized way, because as Thibaut said, yes, it is a globalized and digital way of working, but it should be human-centric. So the human should get the benefits of that new improvements in our world. I would say new improvements because the globalization and the digital way of providing services are providing also a lot of, and we have to recognize a lot of benefits for us as human beings. And on the last point, I would say that here the non-governmental sector also has a significant role to play. And we as regulators, we are coming on the next stage of controlling, of supervising, and trying to bring equal remedies and protection of human beings when using these digital services.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kleiner, I have another question for you, maybe. You referred in your introduction to, indeed, the number of initiatives which have the Commission took to regulate data and AI, the Data Governance Act, the Data Act, the AI Act, DMA, the DSA, and others. Is there how can these regulations be shaped so that they are aligned, I would say, domestically and internationally to enable the safe flow of data across borders? Because I've heard, for instance, on the Data Governance Act, that some industries and businesses have raised concerns about, but is this this duty to disclose certain data, make data available, is that compatible with IP rights that we have, for instance? Or, and these concerns are raised often in, the financial services industry, the pharma industry, other industries. So how do we actually avoid that, some of these regulations are viewed by foreign investors as, which are important for our European startups and emerging growth companies, as a hurdle and not as an incentive for promoting cross-border data flows, for promoting collaboration across transatlantic and with other regions. Does Europe need to shape these regulations to avoid, that it's viewed as, hindering collaboration and international cooperation?
Thanks for this question. I think that first we should realize that the world has moved on. I think that the age of naivety, if I may say, is over also as far as data. I mean, a few years ago, people discovered situations like Cambridge Analytica, the number of cyber incidents, the number of situations where sensitive commercial data were stolen has increased drastically. So I think that your statistics you were quoting on data localization, I mean, we can lament about it, but I think first of all, we should understand why this is happening. And we need to address also the fear maybe that some governments may have that there is something they do not control about these data flows and that they find suspicious. But I think from the European perspective, this is not sufficient. This is not a good answer. We need to understand what is happening, but we need also to build a system of growth enhancing rules and regulation. The idea is not to stop data flows because they are really at the heart of what we can do with the digital sector. The idea is not to localize the data when it's not really necessary. The idea is rather to make sure that we create what we call in the EU a single market for data. And that's what we did a few years ago already in terms of the free flow of data proposals, where we basically told governments, you cannot do this. You cannot localize data. You cannot block the flow of data unless there are justified elements. But that is also important to recognize that there may be situations where, for national security reasons, you want to make sure that the data is under control and you know what is happening, who has access to it. And that's very much what we are trying to put forward with this data regulation in the EU, create a framework where business can trust that if they share the data, they know what is going to happen. They know the boundaries of this sharing. They know who will be able to access it. And that's what we have also in the Data Act, making sure that foreign governments, when they try to access sensitive data, must be identified. And we need to know what is happening there. So at the end of the day, I think that what we are putting on the table is an open discussion to make the data flows work for business. And I think that we were mentioning trust earlier. I mean, the trust is built also on transparency and on mutual understanding of what are the rules and the boundaries. So that's very much our hope, that we can explain what we are doing. And we can also show that the point is not to be kind of protectionist. The point is really to, on the contrary, facilitate data flow in a framework that is clear and consistent. And I think the US very strongly understood this. I mean, we had last Friday this very positive development. We are still studying it. But I think that it should really relaunch transatlantic data flows thanks to a new privacy shield.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kleiner. Very, very insightful and very comprehensive. Thank you. One more final question. We have, I think, 1 minute and a half to go. Private sector. What is how should private sector be involved in shaping regulation and global agreements? And we have only 2 minutes, so a very short response would be hugely appreciated. Who wants to go first?
Maybe I can very quickly say something on this. I mean, I think that today we see in Europe that business is still shy about sharing data. And that's something we need to incentivize. So we have this initiative in EU, which is to create what we call data spaces. So data spaces is a place where you have clear rules and where you can bring your data and use this to build innovation on the basis of shared data. And we hope that this is a model that we can develop further and also expand across borders. Right now, we would like to make sure, for instance, for the issue of environment, that we get data from all over the world to predict better, cataclysmic events, or to make sure that for agriculture, we can use collectively this data to improve, the choice of crop the amount of water you need, and so on. So this really, I think, is something which we need to build collectively, create this sharing of data for common good.
Thank you so much. Monsieur Raffarin, les conclusions. Est-ce que je peux vous donner la parole?
Work for peace, work for trust, and you will work for data flow. I think that's the main point right now. We need trust, so we need peace. So we have to work, everybody. I say that to everybody in this forum, we have to work for peace in Ukraine. That's the best thing that we have to do right now.
Well, unfortunately, time has run out now. So I would like to say a big thank you to you, Monsieur Raffarin, Mr. Karadjov. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Mr. Kleiner, very much appreciated your interventions too. So a big thank you for being with us today in this panel discussion. And I think I'd like to kind of, looking at the program, introduce the next speaker. And as a Belgian citizen, I'm of course extremely delighted to be able to introduce Mr. Didier Reynders. Mr. Reynders is the Commissioner for Justice, and Monsieur Raffarin referred to the current situation in the world and in Europe more particularly. Well, Mr. Reynders is responsible for ensuring the rule of law is upheld, leading on consumer empowerment and the protection of citizens' rights, maximizing the potential of new digital technologies, ensuring the full implementation of the GDPR, and promoting the European approach as a global model, and for contributing to the legislation on AI. Before, and it doesn't need any further introduction, I think, but before joining the EU Commission in 2019, Mr. Reynders held a series of important positions in consecutive Belgian federal governments, was Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Minister of Finance during a period of over 15 years. So I'm very honored to have you with us today, Mr. Reynders, and I'm very pleased to be able to invite you to deliver your keynote speech. Thank you.